Great peace, great peace, great peace. I need to say this because, you know, a lot of my people in the diaspora, they think America is really the place to be, especially like right now. It's not. It's not. Um, while you do see climate research happening, Donald Trump, he just cut climate research on the federal level. So how is that going to affect us when we look at, us as sentient beings and us wanting to be back a part of the planet? We don't necessarily want to take shade when the sun comes, and you know what I mean? Like, we're planet beings, so he cuts research, and you got to think about that too. So you also look at the fact that, you have a lot of young people who are impressed by the hip hop culture. And, you look at the global scene, that kind of disguised drill rap is hip hop, and it's not. Drill rap is a voodoo sport. You know what I mean? Like, it's not hip hop. If you're dissing in hip hop, you're dissing in rap, that's not hip hop. That's voodoo. So we also got to look at that. A lot of people practice voodoo, and they also go to church. So we got that, and don't come to America. Like, go to another region where the politics is a lot more better. And I'm starting to see like a lot of young African people that are choosing to go to Asia. That's better than coming to America, in my opinion, because you get to learn from the people who are trying to colonize the diaspora more so than Americans are. And also, there's a growing concern that, you look at Americans, right? They're constantly changing their look, century after century, right? A century before, Americans looked at one type of way. They looked at like, a West Saharan African, right? They looked at just that typical way. Now, they look Nordic. You know what I mean? So, and they also, with that Nordic look, they carry this championing of, because I experienced it when I was younger, of acting xenophobic, and also putting others down. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of Americans think that bread is better. You know what I mean? So you got to look out for that as well. And it's like, you don't want to come to America, and because this happened, right? A young Ethiopian girl, she was gunned down in Philadelphia, by some people in a drive-by shooting. Like, you see the carelessness that happens on a level of people not taking care of their children and leaving their children in situations where they're doing things like this. This happens across America. This not only happens with blacks, this happens with whites. So you don't want to come to America and mix your politics with them. And this is what I'm starting to see. Like, I can't necessarily express the way I want to feel over my channel, my network, my radio signal, because my satellite signal, because people have this thing about them where, they attack anything African that they see, you know what I mean? And that's a growing concern, and that's a growing stigma that's happening in America that people don't want to address. Africans are being attacked because they're African, and it's been happening over the last decade and more. It's been happening. So I look at it like this, man. If you can't be who God made you to be, if you can't be the person who you were put on this planet to be, then you got to really look back at the mistakes that you made over the generations, as your ancestors kind of went astray. You got to look at that, you know what I mean? You can't make the same decisions that they made. You can't be mixing with everybody, you know what I mean? If you know this person is not African, then don't bother. Don't bother, because like it's the way I see the continent going right now in Africa, there's political problems with, the people in South Africa, where you have a class of people who associate with the natives, and you have a class of people who only associate with the impeders. I don't want to say the other word, but the impeders. So there's a fight over land, and there's a fight over resources. Some people feel like, and then you got the people who are originally from there, right? They're left out of the conversation because the fight is between the Boers and the Khoisan, and the Boers and the San, the Boers and the Germans. The indigenous South Africans, they're left out of everything, so you got to look at it that way as well too. So with Donald Trump doing this thing with climate research, him defining it, and we're kind of left to figure things out, like, well, what is going to happen now? What is going to happen now? You've waited all your life to do things, one particular way. You want to make it right that first time. If you're coming to a country and you got a guy who's a dictator like Donald Trump, and he's telling people, we're going to amp up the police in this area, we're going to defund this program, we're going to re-administrate this part of the White House, and that's dictatorship. It would be advised that, if you're from the diaspora, go to Asia, stay in Africa, go to Brazil. If you think you can make it in Mexico, go to Mexico. But that's always going to be the problem of fascism from the communities that are there. Their face has to be on everything. You know what I mean? They don't want to share any of the things that you built coming to this point in this time. You know what I mean? They don't want to share what you've helped made available to them, right? You're the first people on the planet, and here they're using your metal from where it's minted on there. It says 1963. It's metal from like 1700s. During the time when you were in Monarch, they're using your metals, and they're saying that you can't have this resource of reparations. What is that about? So you got to deal with that as well. And I brought this to Roland Martin's attention, like bring more African guests, because they're all in the universities here. There's Africans in universities of state, of the University of Michigan, Michigan State. There's Africans everywhere in these universities, HBCUs. Bring them onto the show and have them discuss, so there can be a common lining of what needs to be done. But I'm continually saying, like, the people who put money into the show, like, their needs aren't not being met. I've put money into the show, right? And you look at, okay, who are these people that, that's coming on the show, and it's like they don't really represent some of our interests. You know what I mean? Like, so what you do is you just say, I'll just take my membership away and go somewhere else. And, I found a knack of approaching that I have to support people abroad. This is why I'm supporting a guy in Haiti right now. I'm supporting him, supporting his show. He's chronicling his life. And then I'm supporting TVC, Channel News Network in Nigeria. Like, these are things we could be doing right now, instead of just thinking, like, you know what, we need to wait on Trump to do this, or we need to wait on a pundit of either conservatorship or, either Democratic leadership. We need to wait on them. Not at all. We don't need to do that. This is our time to do what we need to do to get things done. Like, we don't really need to wait and say, you know what, let's wait till this person gets it right. And if we know anything about America, they tend to fall on the principle of collaboration. They don't like to work together. They don't like to work across party lines. So if you know they don't like to work across party lines, then they obviously not going to work with, a farmer somewhere in Zimbabwe. They're not going to want to do it. And this person holds all the secrets to how to restore soil. You look at American soil, like nothing grows out of it but fungus. Like, when's the last time you walked down a main street in, a place like Philadelphia or Detroit and actually got a fruit off a tree? Like, that doesn't happen. At most, it happens in Atlanta, right? Peaches and oranges in Florida, but you don't see it spread out in other places, where the majority of black people are. You don't see it. So I think, like, me trying to help other people gather a sense of, working together, from my experience, and, I'll end off on this, like, not the older adults want to work with Africans. The younger people, they really critical towards Africans, and their talking points is kind of like shedded off of the idea that someone been putting stuff into their head and they've been thinking like this may be true. But you also see that the only people who have a little bit of hope are the people who are my complexion and bluer. Those are the only people who you can possibly reach in America if they haven't been brainwashed. Because people who are lighter than me, like, they don't want anything to do with Africans. And this is just coming from experience and dealing with, the different people here in America, and me seeing things, and me being mistaken for not being an American, right? Having a citizenship, a driver's license, a passport, a birth certificate, So it's really that thing that's bogging the community of the world down. That's bogging the United Nations down, right? It's bogging us down, So those are only people who you'll be able to reach. And like a lot of that you're seeing, those type of people who look like, myself and who darker, right? They're disappearing due to admixture with all groups of people. Even people who are classified as black, you're not seeing that seed continue to deteriorate. You're not seeing it. So really think about that, and they're destroying the environment right now. There was just a research study that said fireflies and light bugs, they're disappearing. So they're telling you right now that this environment is going to be different than what it was 100 years ago. It's going to be different. So while I'm trying to help, organizations, plant more trees and, do environmentalism research and do these things on a ground level, when you have Donald Trump coming in saying things like we're not going to help, that's a problem. So I think Michael Reagan, the EPA expert who's with the federal government in the White House in the last administration, I think he was doing a good job. But I can't really say what he was doing actually. But, from the looks of it, right, he wasn't necessarily getting pushback from Joe Biden or anything like that. But, you got to wonder, in his cabinet, right, what were they really pushing for? Because you see a person like me, right? I have to live in an environment where I'm constantly around trees, And if I come into an administration and you're there, right, and you say like, okay, what's wrong with the HARP system? Why isn't it raining all the time in certain places? Why is there droughts during the fall and winter? We need to really lean over and say, we need to put in an edict, do something about the HARP system. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, we can't keep going into droughts, around September. Because, like, again, like, you look at a lot of melanated people, right? Around September, like, they become bipolar. They become schizophrenic. You know what I mean? It just happens because the environment is starting to change. That sunny weather, it's only going to stay in Haiti. It's only going to stay in Jamaica. It's only going to stay in Cameroon. It's not going to stay in a place like Illinois. You know, come September, the leaves are falling off the tree. Do you really want to live in that environment all your life? And that's the thing that you have to ask yourself, you know, because they're doing a medical experiment on the people here in America, because they know we hold the keys. The people who are from the soil of America, who never mixed, they hold the keys. They hold the keys. And you see them all the time in places like, you know, because I used to see them, right? Nebraska, you see them all the time. Detroit, you see them all the time. But we have to be careful about what the federal government is doing to impede on our progress. You know what I mean? Like, you have to sit under the sun during the summer at all hours. You can't work because you haven't got any sun, no vitamin D, you know, come around a mountain, right? Because your body is a portal. It recharges like a battery. If you haven't been under the sun all throughout the summer seasons and you're on a job and you're constantly being covered up by a ceiling, drywall, come September, you're going to be in a world of trouble. And you can't rely on synthetic food like, you know, vitamin D enriched milk. You can't rely on that stuff to get your vitamin D. You can't. You have to be out in the sun. This is how God made us. You're supposed to hear the birds chirping. Think about that. Great peace, Yakoki.